Tonight we're going to cover several topics: food and health, budgeting, finance. But first, I wanted to go over to the APA website, and once you get on the main website, everybody should know you go to AICP, and if you're trying to find all your how to apply for the exam, you go to Get Certified. They've updated some of this information, so they've got, for instance, the two guides for both the May exam and for the November exam here. If you go over to Are You Eligible? It's got the two ones here, and it's going to start to show you the, get you eventually to the November exam, apply for certification. They're going to have the November exam dates here, what the fee schedule is now. So it's $85 for application. If you have to resubmit it in the early bird, it's $100, and the overall registration is $425. Transfer fee is $100. They've got notes about the May exam moved to the summer. Other stuff if you're a candidate. In terms of preparing for the exam, I wanted to make sure, it's got resources from other chapters like our Florida chapter. It's got the 2019 video webinars from the national conference on the different training, plus the slides. Then they've got a whole bunch of online resources. If you look at selected resources, this is where you're going to get things like your reading books, the books that they have in there to look at, as well as policy guides and the past reports they think are important. One of the new things they've added here is under the Knowledge Center. They've added certain portions of the Knowledge Center that they think that you might particularly want to look at. Two of them are on tonight's topics. One is for food planning, community-based food systems. The other is integrating health into the comprehensive planning process. Okay, so you might take a look at those also. I'll probably put those links on some of the things. And then they've got other things like Growing Smart Legislative Guidebook about how planning is done. This has got some interesting things because sometimes they've got how planning works at the state level, how planning works under local government level. So anyway, that's just how to get some of your stuff, and I thought we'd do it before we. All right, some of the feedback. This area, first area we're going to cover tonight is going to deal with food planning and health planning. Here are what's on the website from what are covered by this section that's underneath the areas of practice. So food security, access, justice, food production, food economies, food governance. We'll touch on a few of these. Health planning, active living, aging in place, environmental justice, health district service distribution, health impacts assessment. Here, however, is what some of the feedback has been from the fall exam. Question about food deserts, first step to address food insecurity. One question covered in class. What's the best way to get local food into a city? Somebody else didn't have it on their exam, they thought. Food equity, know what a food desert is, food desert. Two questions on food system planning, housing for aging populations. Other people thought they were adequately prepared. Food planning, how it ties into sustainability and new urbanism overall. Food planning question, limiting access to healthy food in poor areas. Public health and generic. Food desert, food planning, food desert. So you at least better know what a food desert is. Local healthy food procurement plans. Okay, so where would you go first to try to find out about this? Well, like many things, APA's got a policy guide on community and regional food planning. It is a few years old. It's from 2007. But it's nice to go through. So I've highlighted in red here text some of the areas of concern. Several reasons explain why planners have paid less attention to food planning than normal topics like transportation, environment, things like that. Some of these reasons are planners in the past have tended to have a view that the food system only direct touches on the built environment, or that a sense that the food system isn't broken, so why fix it? Of course, may have questions now during pandemic a little bit. Perception that the food system meets neither Two important conditions in which planners act: dealing with public like goods like air and water, or planning for services and facilities like we do for sewers and parks and things like that. So anyway, the following few converging factors that explain the heightened awareness among planners in the food system. Okay, recognition that food system activities take up a significant amount of urban and regional land. Awareness that planners can play a role to help reduce the rising incidence of hunger and obesity. Understanding that the food system represents an important part of community and regional economies. Awareness that the food Americans eat takes a considerable amount of fossil fuel energy to produce, process, transport, and dispose of. So greenhouse gas issues tied into climate change. Understanding that farmland in metropolitan areas and therefore the capacity to produce food for local and regional markets is being lost at a fast, strong pace. Understand that pollution of ground and surface water caused by overuse of chemicals and pesticides adversely affects drinking water supplies. Awareness that the access to healthy food is an increasing problem for which urban agriculture can offer an important solution. And then the recognition that many benefits emerge from stronger community and regional food systems. So current planning activities already affect the food system. For example, land use planners use growth management strategies to preserve ranch and farmland, or recommend commercial districts where restaurants and grocery stores are located, or suggest policies that encourage community gardens or other ways of growing food. Transportation planners may create transit zones connecting low-income neighborhoods with supermarkets. Environmental planners may provide guidance to farmers to avoid adverse impacts on lakes and rivers. So two overarching goals are offered for planners by APA: help build stronger, sustainable, more self-reliant community and regional food systems, and suggest ways the industrial food system may interact with communities and regions to enhance benefits such as economic vitality, public health, ecological sustainability, social equity, commercial and cultural diversity. So this policy guide has 7 general principles, each divided into several specific policies. 7 general principles are: 1, support comprehensive food planning process at community and regional levels. 2, support strengthening the local and regional economy by promoting local and regional food systems. 3, support food systems that improve the health of the region's residents. 4, support food systems that are ecologically sustainable. 5, support food systems that are equitable and just. 6, support food systems that preserve, sustain diverse natural food cultures of Native American and other ethnic minority communities. And so they do get into types of food planning. 7, support the development of state and federal legislation to facilitate community and regional food planning discussed in the above policies. So general effects of the food system on local regional areas. Today's industrial food system has parallel developments in mass production and economies of scale in other industries, and characterized by the use of significant amounts of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and new shipping technologies. Food sector jobs represent close to 15% of the total workforce in many communities, while retail sales from food outlets such as grocery stores and eating and drinking places may be as much as a fifth of the community's total retail sales. Mergers of chain supermarkets often result in the closure of stores, thereby reducing access to healthy food. That's been one trend. Today, food systems are also contributed to the increased incidence of obesity and diet-related disease, loss and erosion of diverse cultural traditions represented by First Nations and immigrant cultures, and ecological crises, including extinct species, declining aquifers, and deforestation. Specific trends related to food systems impacts on locales and regions. Loss of farmland, aging of farmers. 1/4 of U.S. farmers and half of farm landlords are at least 65 years old. The aging of farmers reflects the weakening of family farm institutions, including intergenerational transfer of farm assets. Policies about trying to protect agriculture in certain areas. We have one here in Palm Beach County. We have an ag reserve where we're trying to protect either land for agricultural or possibly for open space, and then certain programs to try to use locally where we can, some of the food production. Farm Bill in local areas. USDA now works with developers to employ land conservation and trying to keep soil on construction sites. Food system links with the economy. Globalization of the food system. Increasingly, food comes from more distant sources with serious consequences such as loss of older local food system infrastructure and threats to the survival of many U.S. farms. Rural decline. Farms on the lower side of 50 to 500 acres and 500 to 1,000 acres, the largest share of working farms, and those that fall between local and commodity markets decreased by about 7 and 11% in 1997 and 2002, while those over 2,000 acres have gone up. So we're getting more corporation farm. I'm getting some feedback. Let me check to see. Okay, thanks, Bo. I don't know if that was you or not, but seems to have decreased. Also been economic impacts on local purchasing. And some areas have been trying to have a local food purchasing policy, which increasingly we're seeing. Food system links with health, farm policy and health. APO thinks that support for fruits and vegetables has been low. Low commodity prices have led to the heavy use by the food industry of products such as high fructose corn syrup, which are linked to obesity and related illnesses. Processed grocery foods, frozen foods, and baked goods represent about 40% of supermarket sales in 2000, while produce claimed only about 9%. Obesity has become increasingly a problem nationwide. Over 60% of Americans are overweight or obese. Many diet-related diseases such as heart disease, cancers, diabetes are found to be more prevalent among minority populations. And about 16% of children ages 6 to 19 were classified as obese. Obesity in the built environment, land use, transportation policy have been implicated in the rise of obesity through both increased food consumption and reduced physical activities. So food system links with ecological systems. Energy consumption in the food system, according to one study, growing, processed, delivering food consumed by a family of 4 each year requires more than 930 gallons of gasoline, or about the same amount of fuel used to fuel the family's cars. Water issues in agriculture, sedimentation and chemical pollutants resulting from agricultural practice continue to pose serious problems for fisheries, wildlife, water-based recreation, and household water use. There's a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico off the Mississippi River, and it's one of the largest such examples of depletion of oxygen caused largely by farm runoff from all of the lands that dump into the Arkansas and Ohio river systems that go into the Mississippi. So basically most of the Midwest. In addition, U.S. agriculture has especially prolific consumer of surface and groundwater. 38% of irrigation water in California and 66% in Texas are pumped from groundwater. Concentrated animal feeding operations. CAFOs, they're agricultural facilities that house and feed a large number of animals in a confined area for 45 days or more during any 12-month period. A few years ago, there was a question about CAFOs that came up on the exam. They produce more than half the 500 million tons of manure that are produced in feedlot operations. Loss of biodiversity. Of course, as you convert natural areas into agricultural areas, you can lose that biodiversity and lose habitat. In Illinois, over 90% of all natural wetlands have been lost due to conversion to, the majority of that is conversion to agricultural production. Fisheries. Fisheries population have fallen out of balance due to overfishing or habitat loss or degradation. Food system waste. One study showed that nearly 30% of all solid waste are related to food consumption, with half of that being for food packaging. On food system and social equity, hunger and food security, 11% of all U.S. households are food insecure because of a lack of sufficient food. That's 22% of Black and about 18% Hispanic experience food insecurity at higher rates than national average. Emergency food assistance, about 20% of the demand for food went unmet in 2004. Food stamps, another issue. Supermarket initiative, research documents lower availability of grocery supermarkets in low-income areas. This results in something often called a food desert, where we'll talk about it a little bit more, but where you can't get access to fresh produce within a neighborhood or reasonable area nearby. Vacant urban lands for growing food. Inner cities have significant amounts of vacant land that, when used for vegetable gardening by low-income residents, produce multiple health, social, and economic benefits. Immigrants and food sector workers. The food system's least desirable jobs are worked by immigrants in vegetable harvest, industrial slaughterhouse, and food processing plants. Okay. Native ethnic food cultures, food issues faced by Native American communities they're particularly hit hard by the loss or threats to their ecologies, habitats, and native food ways. That includes subsistence agriculture, hunting, fishing, and gathering. Diabetes-related mortality among American Indians is over twice that of the general population. Native food planning. There's been different systems started tied to reservations to try to encourage the producing the native meats, fruits, and vegetables for both food security and profit. Ethnic cuisines, all the different variety, Mexican, Italian, Cantonese, Chinese, sought after, but newer cuisines are gaining a threshold. So Greek, Japanese, Asian, soul food, Scandinavian. I mean, like locally, I know we have Haitian and Caribbean and other types. Locally sourced ethnic foods. It's a big billion-dollar specialty food industry and been gradually increasing. All right, I'm going to skip there. Just note a Food Policy Council. State Food Policy Council has been established about the last couple decades. Broadly representative groups in the local and regional system affiliated with cities and counties, local governments. These food councils try to work to strengthen local and regional food system. And again, they've been established at the local or state level, typically. I'm not aware of any that we have in Florida here, but somebody may prove me wrong. So some general specific policies. I'm just going to cover the general ones here. The importance of community participation in all aspects of planning, the usefulness to all general policies of community planning activities and research, plan making, plan implementation, conflict resolution, consensus building, recognition that all planning occurs in a political context and that political support may be garnered more easily for some issues than others, and the existence of tensions between and among general policies, which require dialogue among stakeholders. After that, they'll give a series of general policies. We might talk about a couple of them here. Support the development of plans for building local food reserves and related activities to prepare for emergencies. Let's see. Support strengthening local and regional economies by promoting community and regional food systems. Planners can play a role like supporting to raise public awareness, and so on. I think I'll let you read the rest of these. I think I've highlighted some of the things I thought would be important. Planners can encourage mixed-use neighborhood design redevelopment to include small, mid-sized grocery stores, 3,000 to 20,000 square feet, seasonal food markets. Comes out of the neighborhood plan too. You can try to do some of that. Explore the feasibility of zoning changes to limit the development of fast food outlets within a specific radius of schools. We're going to see in a second a zoning practice article that talks about control of food carts and things like this, and related issues going to come up in there. Let's see. So I think most of these are pretty straightforward. All right. I'm going to go on to just touch on food deserts for a minute. A couple of these articles. So food deserts are areas that lack access to affordable fruits, vegetables, whole grains, low-fat milk, and other foods that make up a full and healthy diet. Many neighborhoods living either in rural, minority urban, or low-income urban areas are subject to food deserts and may be unable to access affordable, healthy foods, living their diets lacking essential nutrients. These are problem areas because they often lack large retail food markets and have a high number of convenience stores where healthy food are less available. So like the little local convenience store may not have lettuce and green beans and fresh corn, the like, even fresh meat and things like that. Who's at risk? It's safe to say that many Americans have limited access to affordable, nutritious food because they do not live near a supermarket or grocery store. And transportation is part of the food desert definition. If you can't afford to have a car and you can't get there by a bus, you got a problem. So how can it be prevented? Well, you could work to establish community gardens that participants share in the maintenance and products of the garden. You can organize local farmers markets that the communities can do themselves. Local governments can improve local transportation like buses and metros to allow easier access to established markets. And they can change zoning codes and offer economic or tax incentives to attract retailers with healthier food offerings to the area. This relates to some of the types of questions that seem to be coming up on exam. So there are a variety of ways the local government community can both improve food access in their neighborhood. All right, and then there's a past memo. Past memo is a little longer article that gets into community food assessments overall. It starts with food deserts and then goes beyond that. So the food desert is the areas that fell outside of a distance, maybe a mile in an urban area where a significant portion of the population with low income was considered food desert because they didn't have access to healthy food. Studies have shown that external factors such as the built environment have direct impacts on the healthy eating to an individual. The term came up in 2006 in a report that overlaid health and socioeconomic data into land use data. And so the location of large grocery stores mapped areas with limited food access. So they did a mapping type of thing like this and showed the areas outside of here, they aren't in the walkable area or easily accessible by public transit, so they're a food desert. So the report's key finding identified areas or neighborhoods with no grocery stores or far distances to such stores and labeled these areas as food deserts. These areas were typically home to low-income minority communities that also faced economic challenges in accessing affordable food to meet their daily nutritional needs. However, there's been such a focus on food deserts that there's been criticism of the concept. Some further concept was its focus on corporate supermarket models as the only solution rather than community-based economic development strategies such as food markets, cooperative mobile markets, growing your own food. And so they developed this other concept called community food assessment, which tries to provide a clearer picture of the food system resources, assets, challenges, and opportunities. And there's a whole long discussion here. And it gets tied into the policy guide that we just talked about, some of the policies, but community food system assessments emphasize community participation through all assessment process to find solutions based on the community's desire. So you get into food environment, built environment, economic factors, social, cultural factors, health, things like that. Anyway, the rest of the article talks about the food assessment. It really hasn't come up yet on exam. It may at some point, but I'm not going to go into more details. It's there for you to look at. There's another past report on food system planning. Food is one part of a complex that includes the following change of activities: production, transformation, processing, distribution, access and consumption, and then resulting disposal of food-related materials, waste, and resources. Okay, so there's all these steps in the food system planning. starting with the production of the use of natural resources to grow edible plants and animals, transforming processing. This is like the packaging plants and the processing and everything where we're having all the COVID-19 problems, distribution, getting it from there into warehouses, consumers, and then of course getting access to that food and the consumption of it, and then the resulting problems with it. So the most affordable, accessible, overeaten foods are dense with calories but poor in nutrients. 4 of the 6 leading causes of death in the United States, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and some cancers, are diet-related chronic diseases. So there's a connection between food and health, which we'll go into health in just a minute. Community food system planning is a collaborative process developing and implementing food on regional land use economic development. 2, 1, preserve existing, support new opportunities for local and regional, urban and rural agricultural. 2, promote sustainable agricultural and food practices. 3, support local regional food value chains and related infrastructure involved in process, packaging, distribution of food. And 4, to facilitate community food security. 5, to support and promote good nutrition and health. And 6, to facilitate the reduction of solid waste and develop or manage a reuse, recovery, recycling, disposal for food waste and packaging. So there's how to do a needs assessment, get into location, number of food sources and outlets with community, and the availability, affordability, and nutrition quality of food sold in those outlets and other aspects. You get into public policy investment, use zoning regulations, financial assessment that can be used to support development, location of food production. You can use a variety of land use tools such as agricultural district programs, growth management laws to protect farm land, support economic viability. Like I said, here we have an ag reserve. So we coupled the land use regulation in a master plan for the ag reserve with $100 million land buying bond issue to try to protect agricultural open space, plus a regulatory framework that restricts the density according to where you are, either to 1 to 10 unit, 1 unit in 10 acres, or 1 unit to 5 acres, with some ways that you can use cluster zoning and get a bonus if you leave 60% or 80% of the land in open space or agriculture. So that's a food system planning article. There's another long past report about guide to community regional food planning. I'm not going to get into it, just show you what it covers. So it gets into food, healthy eating, and planning, current efforts to promote healthy eating through community and regional food planning. So policy issues, planning and zoning ways, neighborhood surveys about planners, about promoting healthy eating through planning. 6 communities' efforts to promote healthy planning, understanding and measuring food environments. So characteristics of food environments, measuring access to healthy food, and then some general strategies how to improve that. So I'm going to leave that with you. What I do want to cover, because we had the question now and then come up, is on food trucks. So there's your handy dandy little food truck, what you've seen. So what is mobile food vending? Well, regulatory codes for many communities recognize transient merchants, those goods and services produced by a traveling vendor. Many operators of food trucks or carts, which are more urbanized settings, are seeking more than a few minutes on the street, sidewalk, or parking, staying in place for a few hours to serve breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Some trucks may be in one location for days, weeks, or even months. I know Wellington, where we are, they have certain specific nights or days in which they can be there. So like Thursday nights, they'll come and they'll have a concert, so all the food trucks will come. And they used to do that on Saturday mornings when they also had a farmer's market tied to it. The pros and cons of food vending. There are many reasons why communities may elect to sanction them. It provides an opportunity to increase jobs in businesses. Those businesses, the cost of starting a food truck can start at about $25,000, where a brick and mortar may start at $300,000. It offered opportunities to provide food choices where zoning precludes restaurants. Many traditional zoning codes tend to restrict the uses permitted in office and industrial districts, only allowing uses that nearly meet the intent of those districts. So, and in New York, for instance, New York City, Green Carts Initiative allows additional permits to be issued over the city's defined limit to mobile food vendors that offer fresh produce in underserved cities. Food trucks can also be a way to enliven an area, generating traffic for existing businesses, possibly spinning off new business activities. This is certainly true when they have an event like here. They're talking about Motor City Eats. This is what Wellington does every Thursday night. They have a big concert and they bring in all the food trucks. So it works really well. While specific approaches vary from place to place, communities interested in adding or updating regulations should start by defining the uses and then consider each of the following questions. Where in the communities can such uses be permitted? How long should a truck be permitted to stay? Are these just for food sales or can they sell other things? Does the zoning address upkeep and maintenance? Are there visitor parking issues? How are these issues reviewed and permitted? By whom? What about signage? What about safety? Some communities try to limit the impact on adjacent residents through a distance requirement or by restriction for hours of operation. Some communities prohibit food vendors within a certain distance of schools or regulate according to sometimes what type of food they can have. Some communities allow food trucks on public property but permit overnight parking. And of course, with the schools, sometimes they limit the food choices that are allowed. Okay. Some communities cap the number of licenses available for food trucks, limit their impact. And that gives you a brief introduction to food trucks. I think we'll have a practice question a little later. There's something known as urban agriculture, growing sustainable places in urban. Again, I'm not going to go through this past report, but tells you what it is, gives you a little history on that, what the benefits and the risks are. Talks about facilitating urban agriculture through different types of planning practice, giving certain goals. So discuss agriculture urbanism, which has come up on the exam. Talks about reusing brownfields for urban agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there for you to read. And we're going to get some food practice questions. So let me just check to make sure everybody's unmuted here. Derek, I've unmuted you, so if you self-mute yourself. Yandra, I've gotten you again. Okay. Okay, Ebony, I'm trying to, there you go. Okay. Heather, I've unmuted you, so if you'd self-mute yourself. Inez, I've unmuted you, so if you'd self-mute yourself. Jim, you're okay now. Michael, I've unmuted you, so if you'd self-mute yourself, please. Nicole, I've unmuted you, so if you'd self-mute yourself. All right, so question number 1. Anybody have an answer yet? Going to regulate street markets and vendors.
C for Charlie.
So C for Charlie. So you say everything but 3. Actually, it includes 3. The answer is all of those. All right. Now, you can have restrictions on certain foods for sale. I mentioned like around schools. Here's the type of things you can do. Communities regulate markets through zoning and business license or through standards of behavior in 8 key areas: Vending locations, sidewalk vending or street markets, exemptions, making sure that you can be next to a business that may be getting a waiver from the business that it's okay with them. Permit caps, capping the number of vending permits in any particular area. Vending area, a bright line, having a line that you can say over here versus a flexible standard that you can say any place in this general region. Space allocation, space allocated by governmental versus designated authority. Restriction on certain goods, like restricting the types of foods that a vendor can have within 1,000 feet of a school, and that may be restricted to fruits and vegetables or salads or things like that, healthy foods. Cart or display design, cart size, but less often cart appearance, and not the cart sign. Typically, that gets into First Amendment issues. And then fees and taxes, so license, how much the permits are going to cost, things like that. Those are all relevant areas.
Henry?
Yes.
I thought the fees and taxes was sort of a trick because, if I may ask the question, like, or frame the question, I mean, I didn't, like, a planner doesn't formally, create regulation, do they? I mean, do they have that power to tax?
Well,
Isn't that really the legislature?
But here there's talking about, okay, may draft the regulations. The regulations themselves may talk about fees and taxes. If you're doing a regulation about how you're going to regulate something, you may get into that in your regulation. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Anybody anybody online done a regulation on food carts? Okay. Anyway, those come right out of the zoning practice article we just looked at. I didn't get into detail on some of those, but it comes right out of there. All right. Number 2.
Dog.
B for boy.
D for dog, I think is going to be. D for dog. All right. It's going to be a food desert geographic area where affordable and healthy food is difficult to obtain, just for those without access to an automobile. Often exists in rural and low-income poor neighborhoods that lack convenient access to affordable food. Now, why it's not B is this is Old Town, so it implies that it's an old established neighborhood, a very poor old established neighborhood. That's not going to be a sprawl issue. If it's Old Town, it's probably one of the oldest sections of the town. It's not going to be a sprawl issue. All right. It's probably not going to be attracting the creative class to try to push them out, and it's probably not going to be provision of skinny streets, which is trying to control the speed of traffic through this area. There's nothing that gets to those. But anyway, the one that clearly knocks it out is 1, combating sprawl, and you definitely are probably going to need to deal with 4. So 4 only shows up twice here and there, so it's going to be that one. Does that help? Okay. This one ought to be straightforward.
A.
A, food desert. Yep. So where healthy, affordable food is difficult to obtain, it happens in both rural and urban areas, associated with a variety of diet-related health problems, and linked with the supermarket shortage. Okay, we talked briefly about this. It's obviously not one of my questions because it's got 5 options. And again, we just briefly touched on this. Just use your, go ahead.
A for apple.
Yes, A for Apple. At the time the question was written, 25 states had food policy council, focused on education policy, but not regulatory issues. So not about controlling land use, not about subsidizing organic food as opposed to anything else, all right? Lester Brown, in his book, Rescuing a Planet Under Stress and a Civilization in Trouble, that which country will demand more food in 2030 than the entire world produces today? Again, not one of my questions.
China.
China, yes.
I would have thought it was India, but okay.
More people in China. The correct answer is D, according to the article. And I don't. The article is 2008. Shows that oil consumption is peaking while demand is increasing to increase. Of course, right now we're in a down cycle. China will demand more food in 2030 than the entire world produces today. And that's from 2008. That may be the last question on food. Again, if you know food desert and know some of those other steps, let's look back at some of the types of things that were being asked here again. Food deserts, first step to addressing food insecurity. What was the best way to get local food into a city? Best way to improve access to food in the city. Know what food desert was, blah, blah, blah. Ask which section you would like to define health planning. That's the next section. That's the next. These questions are both food and health. But realize that we do have, what section would you like to define? What section of a comprehensive plan would you like to define food health planning elements in? And we'll talk about that a little bit when we get there. All right. So with that, I'm going to go over to the equivalent of what I just did for food planning. I'm going to go to the policy guide on healthy communities, which APA just came out with in 2017. I'm just going to touch on a few things here. Planning policy solutions that directly address the determinants of chronic disease are among the most effective ways for communities to reduce illness and injuries and promote quality of life. Conditions in which people live, work, and age have a greater role in community health than individual behaviors and clinical care. Planners and policymakers influence these things through such things as land use, urban design, transportation, which will also affect local air quality, water quality, supply, transportation safety, access to physical activity, healthy food, affordable housing, and other things. Healthy communities are defined as places where all individuals have access to healthy built social, economic, and natural environments that give them the opportunity to live their fullest potential regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, income, age, abilities, or other social defined circumstances. Okay, so this is a key point in the document. Know that. Planning in the United States originated public health purpose. Rapid industrialization, urbanization in the late 19th century resulted in overcrowded, poorly constructed housing, noxious industrial and manufacturing uses, increased levels of human and animal waste. The early activists and public officials who became the founders of the planning and urban health profession secured a focus on urban reform and the community goal of preventing outbreaks of infectious disease. Throughout the course of the 20th century, our planning diverged from its common root with public health. Who were some of the leaders at the turn of the 20th century that were involved in this combination of public health and housing issues. No? Maybe we should go look at the timeline. Jacob Riis, ring a bell? Anybody else? The father of the modern housing code?
Lawrence Fayette.
Yes. So, anyway, there's all those tenements and all that crowding and all that public health stuff, using children's and working. Anyway, same time, public health and planning professions have been responsible for discriminatory policies that led to health disparity. Zoning has been used to severely restrict certain housing forms that could better serve lower income residents. Urban renewal led to destruction of many poor but viable communities, as did major new highway alignments. Who was involved in some of this that really got criticized? What major, particularly in New York City?
Moses.
Robert Moses, right. Historically, these decisions are linked to some of the nation's most intractable public health, including adult and childhood obesity, substance abuse, cancer, respiratory problems, environmental justice. Not only should planners be aware of them and understand how the planning decisions exacerbate them, but planners should also implement planning-centric solutions that mitigate or reverse them. Planners' role. Since the plan of Chicago was completed in 1919, the comprehensive plan has been commonly used as a guiding document for decision-making about the built natural environment. It has the scope to cover necessary functions and facilities, the history of practice, to inspire public acceptance policies, in some cases the legal authority to act as a vehicle for guiding development. So because comprehensive plans can integrate long and short-term perspective and coordinate policy plans, programs into one document. So rationale and key facts for health communities. There are unintended consequences of land use decision, including zoning, design standards, transportation, and other public investments that have well documented ecological, social, and economic adverse impacts on communities. For example, Euclidean zoning has divided land use so that using an automobile is the only way for people to get to commercial and employment opportunities, limiting people's ability to use other modes of transportation, causing traffic congestion for increased air pollution. There have been many number of non-medical factors that matter for health. Recent research found that 50% of premature deaths are attributable to non-medical factors such as where one lives and the opportunities for health and economic mobility, including education, jobs, income, access to housing, community safety, and other well-established social determinants of health. Proving health requires addressing poverty at roots. Growing evidence has revealed that low-income communities and communities of color tend to experience the greatest disparities in health, often associated with preventable chronic disease such as heart disease, diabetes, and hypertension. People who have a stronger sense of belonging to their local community tend to live longer, healthier lives and have fewer mental health challenges than those with a weaker sense of belonging. The stronger the sense of belonging, more likely people were to exercise, lose weight, and eat more healthy in the 2012 study of about 120,000 people. So general policies and planning for healthy communities, planners should consider the following general policies to the complete health and well-being. Try to promote physical health and well-being. Physical activity and healthy nutrition are two of the most important determining factors for our health. Planners should encourage land use patterns, alternate transportation, and combat built forms conducive to physical activity, healthy eating, healthy environments. Social health and well-being. Planners should aim to create social environments that meet community needs, including walkable streets, parks and recreational facilities, meeting places, and mixed-use destinations for people to meet that promote a sense of community and place, reduce social isolation, stress, depression, and homelessness. Trying to prevent mental health and well-being. Planners should protect natural environments and develop healthy built environments to help people reduce stress, depression, health disparities, and mutually support each other in performing all the functions of life, encouraging their maximum development. Specific policies, I won't get into the details, but I'll just give you the general categories. Engage and empower the public. Have work on getting cross-sector collaboration on how to resolve issues. Try to health in all policies framework so that everything is considered from the health point of view. Try to have evidence-based and informed practices based on listen to the scientists. Design for healthy neighborhoods and communities. Trying to work on funding and activities. The rest of this gets into more detail about that, but the American Planning Association support the following policy outcomes: compact urban areas and complete neighborhoods that meet the daily needs of all people within comfortable walking or bicycling distance of their homes. Try to have redevelopment of suburban areas to make them more walkable, bikeable through plans, regulations, incentives. Try to have communities designed so that physical activity is part of everyday activities and it's the easy choice. Try to prioritize funding for infrastructure that helps communities build more compact, walkable neighborhoods and provides robust transit and active transportation options. Try to engage local residents in planning for more walkable, bikeable urban environments, and in the planning, the design of healthy communities and healthy housing. Try to work on the development of trail systems and other publicly accessible community amenities in urban, suburban, and rural areas. Try to use best practices at the local and regional that have been recognized as leading to type of healthy activities they want. Try to adopt placemaking strategies and policies that advance equitable, healthy design. Try to develop effective, efficient public transportation networks. Trying to utilize concepts such as multimodal quality, level of service, level of stress, and person trip generation methodologies. Try to promote regional citywide policy programs that direct growth to established communities. Try to work on policy to provide options to all people, particularly those at higher risk for poor health outcomes, for access to affordable housing, safe and convenient transportation, safe and healthy places for work, life and play, healthy environment, especially clean air, clean water, healthcare, social interaction. Try to provide policies and incentives that expand access to healthy food. Try to provide incentives to attract other organizations to provide community recreation facilities. Try different policies that encourage aging in place to give older residents the opportunity to stay in their community. Aging in place has come up in the exam. I think we've got something to talk about in a little bit. Try to promote policies and design guidelines to address the effects of climate change, including rising water, to minimize disproportional climate impacts on marginalized communities. That's a social justice and environmental justice policies. Try to promote policies that address the underlying causes of gentrification, displacement. Try to address siting and co-location of new health care facilities through zoning and incentives. Try to site essential healthcare facilities outside the 500-year floodplain so that they're not at risk. There has been a question about dealing with, I think, sightings of healthcare facilities from a flood management point of view. So start to try to site them or move them so they're outside the 500-year floodplain. Try to give incentives and partnerships to encourage regional hospitals to retain, develop, and expand outpatient treatment and educational centers in underserved areas. Trying to promote, support unconventional settings for healthcare services to underserved communities through use of non-traditional settings such as schools, places of worship, etc. And the last four, trying to improve transit accessibility and service to healthcare facilities so that access to healthcare is equitable. Try to communicate relevant information among all agencies regarding access to healthcare and healthy lifestyles that are culturally and linguistically appropriate, meet different communities. Increase local, state, and federal funding for coordination of healthcare services, and then provide housing that offers a variety of housing types that are affordable, accessible, dispersed across metropolitan areas. And then there's some more discussion of that. There's also something here on defining success for communities. And the only thing I want you to really be aware of is one thing we don't cover is really metrics and getting to how you do assessments and things like that. And there is a little bit in here having some metrics. So When I talk about active transportation policies and what that means, they've got over here the commute mode share, the ratio of sidewalk to bike lane to roadway miles, percent of population within walking distance of transit. So they've got different ways to measure in metrics. So you might take a look at these recreational policies, acres of park per thousand population, et cetera, et cetera. Air, water, soil, percentage of green stormwater investments relative to dollars invested, number of brownfields that are not remediated, natural disaster and climate change policies, percent of population living in 100-year, 500-year flood areas, percent of plans that fully integrate meaningful climate change data, etc. So healthy food systems, percent of low-income population living in urban areas that are not within walkable distance of full-service grocery stores. So anyway, those are some metrics, some other terms you ought to know. You ought to know from other places what complete streets are. But complete streets are streets that are available for everyone. They're designed, operated to ensure safe access for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, transit riders of all age and capabilities. Complete street makes it easy to cross the street, walk to shops, bicycle or work. Typical elements that make up a complete street include sidewalks, bicycle lanes, shared use paths, designated bus lanes, transit stops, safe crossing for pedestrians, including median islands, accessible pedestrian signals, environmental justice, circumstance which no segment of the population, regardless of race, color, natural origin, or income, suffers disproportionately from adverse human health or environmental effect. And all people live in clean, healthy, sustainable communities. Equal protection from environmental hazards should be for all groups, regardless of race, ethnicity, and economic status. Basically implies that no population of people should be forced to shoulder a disproportionate share of negative environmental impacts of pollution or environmental hazard due to a lack of political or economic strength level. It's part of NEPA. It was done through, added on as a supplemental requirement through President Clinton's Executive Order 12898, I believe the number was, so that it has to be considered in doing things like environmental assessments and environmental impact statements. All right, another term that you need to know, health impact assessment. It's one that comes up right here on the outline, health impact assessment. It refers to any combination of qualitative, quantitative measures used to assess the population health consequences of a policy, project, or program that does not have health as its primary objective. So, in other words, you're assessing the health consequences of non-health sector actions. So, if you're going to do approve a new giant shopping mall, you could do a health impact assessment. If you want to think of it like the health equivalent of an environmental impact statement, it's sort of that same thing. Okay, so health impact assessment is sort of like an environmental impact assessment, except it's looking at the impacts on health, which gets into all the other issues that we've talked about. I think that's all I wanted from this document. That leads into a little bit more on what a health impact assessment is from Planning Magazine. Come on, move down. So it evaluates the positive and negative health, human health effects of a proposal, including the unintended consequences on human health. It sort of has 6 stages, just like it's sort of like equivalent to an EIS: screening, scoping, assessment, reporting, monitoring, and evaluation. Some aspects resembles a familiar environmental impacts assessment. Number of HIAs are being conducted and required for zoning, things like that. Federal agencies use it. Can be a valuable tool because it promotes public health objectives and improves the communication between local and national governments. And it has its root in assessments because we already use, like things like environmental impact assessments. So it's just another one that is very analogous to that, but from the health point of view rather than environmental. All right. If you remember, there was a question. Some people commented on, asked what section you would like to find health planning elements in the comp plan. I've got 2 publications here, both APA, Comprehensive Planning for Public Health. That I found, and talks about considering the impact of the comprehensive plan. There's a need to explore the role comprehensive sustainability plans play in identifying local health issues and promoting the long-term health of the community. So some local governments create a standalone voluntary health element in the comprehensive plan, while others incorporate health-related goals and policies in existing mandatory elements of the plan. That's more the standard. So approximately 27% of all respondents that they surveyed found that their jurisdiction's official adopted comprehensive plan explicitly addressed public health, but only 3% reported that they have a sustainability plan that addresses public health. So comprehensive plans seem to be addressing it to some degree, but sustainability plans don't seem to be doing that. The top 10 most cited public health topics include recreation, public safety, clean water, active transportation, clean air, emergency preparedness, active living, physical activity, environmental health, aging. The 10 most cited public health as in the sustainability plan were active transportation, clean air, clean water, active living, physical activity, recreation, environmental health, food access, and public safety. Where are they located in the plan? Majority of respondents noted that public health types were addressed in the land use, transportation, recreation, open space, or bicycle and pedestrian elements of the comprehensive plan. So that's where the majority of people are putting it. 23% said that they had a standalone health impact. Most of these are West Coast or Northern California, 8 in California, 2 from Minnesota, 2 from Oregon, 2 from Alaska, 2 from Texas, and then 10 other states. I'm not aware of any that we have in Florida necessarily, but there probably is somebody that's got it. So anyway, that addresses a little bit where they're occurring. There's more discussion about that. Showing you here, they've got, this is comp plans that explicitly address public health. We seem to have some in the central part of the state and around this looks like Gainesville area over, and this down here, maybe Orlando area and on up. So those are adopted, those are plans that explicitly address public health issues. And sustainability plans that explicitly address public health, we don't seem to have any in Florida, although there may be something there. It's hard to tell. There may be some cities.
Excuse me, Henry.
Yes?
On your prior point, in terms of the policy guides that are out there, it seems like the environmental issues are spread over several different policy guides. I see this one for climate change. There's also the sustainability framework,
Right.
which overlays everything.
Right.
But the ones that are named environmental only cover waste management and wetlands. So is APA going in a certain direction with this, or is just,
These are remember, they use policy guides also to lobby with, but there's another one that I think you missed, or maybe they've just phased it out here. It's okay. Related is agricultural, but there's also endangered species and habitat protection.
yes,
And then there's waste management, wetlands,
and water.
and there's water, which is a big issue, and that's probably about it. And of course,
All
the
right.
sustainability framework, yeah. But there is, it doesn't come up on the exam very often, the endangered species habitat stuff, but there is that one. On the exam, of all of those, probably the sustainability framework comes up the most, and water. Okay. because they've had a big push on water stuff, and that's a fairly recent one. You may get an occasional question on waste management. You may get an occasional question on wetlands, more tied often to GIS. You know, how do you do a buffer in GIS, things like that to protect wetlands. But you do have these other ones here. Okay?
Yeah, it's just that because social justice is included under NEPA, and sustainability does include some health issues.
Environmental justice.
Environmental justice.
Environmental justice. There's a slight difference between social justice and environmental justice. They don't try to get too tricky on that, but they may ask you a question about social justice and a separate question on environmental justice. And we only briefly touched on social justice. Okay, anyway, this is what this deals with, dealing with comp plans. The other thing that comes up that gets into that is there's a quick notes that's talking about integrating health into the comprehensive plan, and it says something very similar. It says, land use element is the place to include goals and policies that encourage increased density and an appropriate mix of uses. The transportation is the place to importance of transportation and consider the needs of all users. Housing element sets the stage for housing opportunities, decreasing poverty, increasing availability of affordable housing for other things. The community facilities, a place for public safety, things like that. Then they note that some communities, new health element may be an effective way to try to deal with this. Moreover, there are some issues such as food access that may not fit easily into the other existing elements. So I'm not sure how the question is going to be phrased, but there is this question about ask what section you would like to find health planning elements in the comprehensive plan. So we've seen several places. You may see them in land use, transportation, housing, community facilities, or maybe its own separate one. Okay. And I'm not sure where they're taking that question from, but that shows you some things. All right, aging in place. Aging in place also comes up on the exam. Centers for Disease Control, CDC, defines aging in place as the ability to live in one's own home and community safely, independently, and comfortably, regardless of age, income, or ability level. So whether you're handicapped or not, whether you can get around or drive or not, most adults would prefer to age in place, that is, remain in their home of choice as long as possible. In fact, 90% of adults over the age of 65 report that they would prefer to stay in their current residence as they age. 1/3 of American households are homes to one or more residents 60 years of age or older. Technology can be an enabler for aging in place. There are 4 categories of technology as a service enabler: communication and engagement, health and wellness, learning and contribution, and safety and security. Home modifications, there's simple, low-cost modifications to an elder's house that can greatly decrease the risk of falling, as well as decreasing the risk of other types of injuries. For instance, increased lighting, accessibility switches both ends of the stairs, additional railings, grab hold bars, non-skid floors, handheld flexible shower head, walk-in bathtubs, removal of throw rugs, clutter. Many homes are built or refitted with the universal design model in mind, which makes everything in the home accessible to all people with or without functional limitations. And aging in place can further be defined as there's 3 different types. Aging in place without urgent needs. These are individuals who want to stay in their current home, not experience any immediate health or mobility issues, and prefer aging in place. Aging in place with progressive condition-based needs. These are made up of those with chronic or progressive conditions that require special modifications for aging in place. They're usually aware of their needs, but many have chronic conditions such as diabetes or lung and heart disease that challenge them. And then the last one is aging in place with traumatic change needs. These or includes those who experience an abrupt or immediate change that demands adjustment in their living environment for aging in place, such as home modifications or doing universal design. And that's about all. I may throw another pass type report on the FTP site that gets a little bit more in age in place. We've had aging in place questions come up. So let's go to some questions.
Henry,
Yes.
the universal design mostly began after ADA was passed. Is that correct?
I don't know. We'll have to look. Let's see if we can find that real quick. The ADA includes 2010 ADA standards for universal design, universal suggest, blah, blah, blah. Let me take out this and see what. History of universal design. '20th century, blah, 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 design. So it looks like some of the publications are late 20th century, but doesn't really, okay. More generalized concept of accessible design emerged in the 1970s and promoted, this is accessible design. And it's just here's coined by an architect. So some of it goes back to 63. Some of it goes to, looks like, well, I'm not sure 2013 is the right date. But anyway, some of it may go back to the 1960s. And of course, the ADA come out much after that. All right.
Yep,
Says,
I just recalled
yeah.
something like that, so I wanted to check it.
I think the concept goes back earlier than the ADA.
I think it came to the fore. Though,
That may be.
It could have.
So ADA is 1990. So it looks like some of the universal design goes back into the 60s. All right. Health planning questions. Environmental justice, which as we saw was part of the health planning.
For boy.
So B as in boy, B as in boy. So it requires mitigating the impacts of adverse federal impacts on Native American and minority populations. Major development in environmental justice occurred in 1994 when President Clinton signed Executive Order 12898, directing all federal agencies to address environmental justice and federal actions and to develop strategy for do so by requiring that each federal agency shall make achieving environmental justice as part of its mission by identifying and addressing as appropriate disproportionate high and adverse human health or environmental effects of its program, policies, and activities on minority populations and low-income population in the United States. In essence, it is an add-on to the NEPA process. It does not require mitigation in and of itself, nor does it apply to all populations impacted by environmental pollution. It covers both minority and low-income communities. Robert Ballard's famous book called Dumping in Dixie, Race, Class, and Environmental Equality in 1990, addressing the protests against the siting of a landfill containing PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, in primarily African-American Warren County, was the instigation was the thing that really promoted environmental justice. And there's a past report on it that I'll try to remember and add also to the FTP site. It's probably also on the FTP site under the NEPA stuff, but I'll put it here too. This is a Word one, so I can cheat and do this. All right, County Administrator.
B for boy.
B for boy? Yes. If you're going to put a landfill in, you're not going to be worried about housing gentrification issues. So, EPA defines environmental justice as a fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development and implementation of environmental laws, regulations, policies. Although its origins go back much further, President Clinton issued Order 12898 in 1994. And as we mentioned, it requires that achieving AG must be part of each agency's issue with respect to addressing the disproportionate high and adverse human health or environmental effects of their actions on minority and low-income populations. Henry just loves these multiple part questions. All right. Agent in place concepts include which of the following?
A for apple.
E, D.
A for
Yes,
apple.
dog.
It's going to be A and apple. It's going to be complete streets and the remaining in one's neighborhoods. It's not going to be separation of land uses because you're going to be mixed. Hopefully you have mixed uses where maybe they can walk to a grocery store or things like that. And it's not going to be retaining elderly automobile dependency. It's going to be making sure that regardless of whether they can drive or not, there are ways available to get to where they need to go. In some communities like Wellington, they have special little mini buses that come and take the elderly to their doctor's appointments, to the grocery store, wherever they need to go. That you can do. So anyway, complete streets and connected sidewalks, trails allow seniors to remain healthy while taking care of errands or meeting friends. Aging in place most often refers to an elderly person staying in their home as they age, rather than moving to a retirement community, a senior home, or assisted living facility. The definition is often expanded to include the elderly sticking to neighborhoods where they've always lived, rather than heading into retirement communities. Okay? Everybody understand? All right. So we talked about a complete street. Let's talk about what a complete street is.
C.
D as in dog, a street that, C as in cat. Is that what you're saying? C or D?
Yes. C.
C. Okay. Now the answer is C. Street that ensures safe, healthy, convenient, and comfortable travel and uses for all users. Is a transportation policy design approach that requires streets to be planned, designed, operated, and maintained to be enable safe, convenient, and comfortable travel and access for users of all ages and all abilities, regardless of their mode of transportation, whether walking, biking, transit, cars, whatever. Okay, and there's a series of links there. So that's the questions. That's the presentations on food planning and on health. So now we're going to go into budgeting financing. So let me get this a little bigger. So here is some of the feedback we've gotten on that. First person felt they were adequately prepared for finance. Other people got, what is the benefit of the sources of budgeting over a line item budget? So line item budget versus the other types of budgeting. How do you address a consultant who isn't doing their duties adequately? That's also sort of goes across on ethics. Another said nothing in RFP, RFQ. We get it here a little bit. We get it over when we did planning and consulting and things like that. Another person said they didn't get anything. Well, we got one or two questions covered in class. Another one had capital budgeting, capital improvement versus annual budget. Another one had budget and impact fees. Line item budget question, program budget question, CIP, TIF, special assessment, property taxes. Asked about which one would be included in the capital budget. Options A, B, C, or D, whatever. Multiple fiscal impact questions. They didn't get zero base question. Other people have gotten it. Benefit of program budget over line item. Why performance budgeting was better than line item budget. How TIF works. Definition of certain types of financing. Linear budgeting. Now, does anybody know what linear budgeting is? I think that might have been meant to be line item budgeting. But I looked up linear budgeting. I just got stuff basically from Europe. I don't know what linear budgeting means in the United States. If anybody knows, let me know. I had a factual question about types of budgeting, the pros and cons. Financing question. Prepared for everything except for budgeting. Budgeting economic analysis. Taxes, financing, budget type, but didn't have a clue on. But they didn't review that area either. They didn't know what tax incurrent financing was, which you definitely need to know for the exam. Why line item budgeting is not the best choice, blah, blah, blah. Direct versus indirect costs within a private sector firm. Capital improvements plan, where should capital improvements plan be in a comp plan? What's the first thing you do in preparing a SIP? Thank you, Henry, for preparing me for that. We won't cover that tonight, but we covered it another night. Oh, we might cover it tonight. I don't have to look. Consultants, budgeting, if I found those confusing. A lot of program budgeting questions. I was very glad I studied the glossary the week before and rewatched the public participation in budget session. Public participation we'll do next week. I don't know if we'll have anything else besides that.
Is that the glossary you compiled, Henry?
This is the glossary here that I assume that they're talking about. There's two glossaries. One is on the FTP site. You have to search a little bit to find it. But I think the glossary they're really talking about is the one that's on the website of our study links. If you just put in APA, Florida, AICP exam links, you'll get there. Or if you go to the professional development site, in other words, if you just put in just something like that, you get exam guide and links, okay? And that should take you. And the way I like to use the one up here, it says you can download large PDF of the study links here. I like to go just right there rather than trying to look at it on the rest of the thing. And it comes up as one PDF file. And it was updated in June last year. I update it typically about once a year. And at the bottom of it, it's got a glossary of single topics, single terms, and events. And I recommend everybody, if you do nothing else the week before the exam, look at that glossary, because some people have said it saved them 10 to 20 questions on the exam. So if I get feedback that somebody doesn't know a topic like clawback, which we'll cover tonight, I then try to put a link there and update you on what it is. All right, we're on this one. So in fact, somebody got clawback here, someplace here, but zero-based budgeting here, no clawback, things like that. So anyway, you got all of these different terms. We're going to go this presentation is one that Francine developed with some of my input, and then I modified it today. So Francine Romaglia, she was the assistant director, assistant city director for Wellington, and then for can't remember if it was Boynton or another one over by Boynton. It wasn't Boynton, it was another one. But anyway, but I modified this. So public finance, the purpose, role of public finance is to allocate public goods, to distribute those in an equitable fashion, and to hopefully have the result being a stable economy. So local expenditures may be for things like public welfare, education, streets, highways, health programs, hospitals, police, fire protection, other things. The revenues, you want to make sure you get enough revenues to meet your needs. You want revenues to meet or exceed your expenditures. You want the revenue source to be stable, reliable, that would be equitable, and that'd be politically acceptable. What is a budget? One definition of budget from Aaron Wildowski is a budget is goals with price tag attached. But other definitions from like Webster's Dictionary says it's official statement from a government about how much it plans to spend during a particular period of time and how it will pay for the expenditures. Another one is process consisting of activities that include development, implementation, evaluation of plan for the provision of services and capital assets. All sorts of different types of budget. There's been evolution. The oldest, but still probably the most widely used, is line by line. You got incremental, and you got zero-based, results-based, priority-based. We're going to talk about some of these. The traditional line item is more the analysis of economic demographic trends, current conditions to evaluate what your future expenditures or needs are. You estimate revenues, expenditures, and then you evaluate those to different policy objectives. You got a bunch of different types here. Traditional program performance, PPBS, zero-based, often used. They're used in combination. The PPBS is a planning program budgeting system. We will talk about it. We're not going to talk about the Dayton system, which combines PPBS and zero-based approaches. And I'm listed in rows and categories. But I did come up with a summary of budget approaches. So you have a little bit, and I tried to identify one of many advantages and one or two of the advantages and one or two of the disadvantages of each type of thing. So line item budget was a traditional system. Line item budget is also called traditional budgeting. The line item is still the most widely used budgetary approach and outlines the items on which money will be spent, but may not necessarily provide information on exactly what will be done. Generally, a line item budget has categories such as personnel, for maybe if it's public agency, for the agency, equipment, maintenance, things like that. Each line item is given the same weight or importance, even though some may be more complex or some may really be a higher priority. So revenue sources are linked to each item of expenditure, providing a degree of relationship between the revenue source and expenditure. However, line item budgets are not easily used as management tools because they're not really lend themselves to who's succeeding, who's not succeeding, what are we doing well in, what are we, things like that, because they're more categories like personnel, equipment. They're not, how is this program doing, or how is that part of the organization doing or things like that. So it is easy to prepare, it is easy to implement, but it has a lack of priority assignment. It doesn't say what it is should be given priority. And it's sort of a fixed and rigid system that goes year from year, and everybody assumes that they'll get what they got last year, maybe with an increase for rate of growth or things like that. Now, I could have put these in different orders, but I put program budget next. Instead of being organized by line items, the program budget is different in that it considers the purpose, i.e. the program, as a unit. So if you have an agency and you've got 20 different programs in it, each program would come in program by program. So if you're a local government and you've got something that deals with zoning, something deals with long-range planning, something deals with subdivision review, you may come in separate program by program. So that program comes in rather than the separate administrative units like personnel, equipment, maid, etc. This type of budget includes expenses and revenues related to one specific program. The advantage is it helps determine program priority, helps identify where funds are needed also, because if it's a high priority and it's not getting money, then maybe it needs to get more. And the disadvantage are if no program budget, if the program budget is incorrect or based upon incorrect information, it can be costly to try to get it back and figure out what's going on. So you've got to know what the program's doing and more details about it than other. Okay, third type, go ahead. Did you have a question, somebody?
You were asking about linear budgeting.
Yeah, asking about linear budgeting.
The linear budgeting is relates to linear programming, and it's on Pennsylvania Planning Association, page 126.
Okay, so what does it mean though?
And that's it says about the most efficient outcome it brings out to.
All right, I've never, anybody heard of linear budget? I've heard of linear programming a little bit. But,
When
yeah,
resources that's use it, yeah.
okay, so I'll maybe look and see if I can find something on it. But I just have linear programming. I know has come up on the exam a while ago. I haven't seen it recently, but I have. This is the first time I've heard of linear budget coming up as a concept, and I couldn't really easily find it. But I'll look at it now. So I'll look at the Pennsylvania guide and then look at what I can find from that. All right, performance budget, and I worked in budget, but not very long. I worked in budget for a year, and did a strategic plan in that time, set the agency's priorities according to the criteria that we set up in the strategic plan, and did basically a zero-based budgeting type of thing, which we'll talk about. Performance budget, and it was a combination of zero-based budgeting and performance a little bit. Performance budget takes program budgeting one step further by tying the budget to specific performance objectives for each program. It classifies expenditures by administrative units, by functions, by items, includes outputs as well as inputs to government activity. It involves formulation and adoption of plans and activities for a time period, funding, for instance, related program costs and performance and resources, and execution, achievement of the plan within the time frame. Some of the advantages are it improves program performance. It's a tool for reviewing program efficiency because you're going to be able to monitor those performance objectives. Disadvantages, it focuses often on quantitative, not qualitative evaluation, and the accuracy of that evaluation can be difficult. Zero-based budgeting, ZBB. This was introduced as a rational budget innovation by President Carter in '76, along with the concept of sunset provisions, meaning where a program or agency expires after a certain time unless specifically renewed. The concept of ZBB is that existing programs should not be automatically funded, but rather have to justify their continuation as part of the annual budget cycle. So each year, you start from zero and you have to justify why you should get any money at all, rather than like in program, but like in line item budget, you just start with where you were last year and you maybe add money onto it. So therefore each program or project is thus vulnerable to being zero funded if it's not a priority. That's why we did the prioritization in the strategic plan, saying such things as, well, you can justify yourself if you're priority because of your legislative requirement, or you're part of you're required by federal law. So one was state law, federal law, that you're involved with, you're part of the Everglades Restoration Plan, a plan, if part of a funding source that's coming from either from a federal government or something like that. So like Everglades Restoration was a priority. So there was a series of criteria like that that you had to justify yourself at. Another one was basically that you're required to, because of emergency management considerations, so like the flood protection program, things like that, and the canal maintenance programs, those came because they could tie themselves to emergency management. Anyway, so each program is subject to zero funding. The advantage is it increases the prioritization. You get better and better prioritized programs. You get a reduction in redundant or ineffective programs that can't be justified. The disadvantage is it can be very time consuming, it's very labor intensive, and you have to have training to your staff to be able to produce accurate budget justifications for the budget. So the training can be also difficult. So, all right, another one, a planning program budgeting system, PBBS. It's an outgrowth of research taken by the defense industry after World War II. It combines a program budgeting model with short and long-term planning targets and performance measures. It serves as a long-term planning tool so that decision makers are made aware of the future implications of their actions. These are typically most useful in capital projects. The planning portion of the approach seeks to link goals to the objectives or expected outcomes from specific outputs, which are then sorted into programs that convert inputs into outputs. Finally, the budgeting helps determine how to fund the program. The advantages are it helps in the choice of programs, projects. It allocates resources on them and performance evaluations. And it also can incorporate future budgetary repercussions. The disadvantage, it can be difficult to acquire necessary information regarding performance evaluation and cost estimation in a uniform way for all the governmental activities that you may be doing inside a particular agency, because you've got to try to have them basically looked at so they're equitable in terms of how their performance is measured and things. Also, a disadvantage is that it emphasizes physical and financial performance and not qualitative performance. There's a new type of budgeting called new performance budgeting. I'm not very familiar with it, but it's a type of results-oriented or objective-oriented budgeting. And the effort is to link resource allocation with managerial performance and strategic plans, along with annual performance plans. It includes budgeting for outcomes and performance-based budgeting. So that's basically a quick overview on budgeting types of programs. There's the other ones. You can get a long list and add more, but those includes some of the ones that seem to be coming up. So what do you do in the budgeting process? So budgets turn plans into reality. That's why planners need to be familiar with how they work. So the budgeting process has multi-steps. You're going to try to do a financial analysis and start developing policy choices. You're going to start to develop expenditure estimates and a review of those expenditure estimates to try to make sure that everybody's agreeing with them. Then you review your revenue, you produce your revenue estimates, and you come up with a budgeting forecast. And develop a budget document, have that budget reviewed and adopted, and then finally you execute it. So what are some of your revenue sources? Well, taxes. Taxes can be on income, property, sales use, gasoline, cigarette, intangibles. You can have user fees and charges for like admissions to publicly owned golf course or zoo, or registration or applications or usage, dog tags or whatever. Well, that's license permits actually. License permits like for dogs and cats, driver's license, contractors, marriage license, hunting, fishing operators. Another type of revenue source can be from grant. That can be from the feds or from the state. There can be categorical, specific types of things that you're going to have to do, or it can be block grant, a more open-ended. If you do anything within this larger realm of things, like anything needs city maintenance or something, that can be a block grant. And then other types of revenues, debt proceeds, sale of surplus property, reimbursements, assessments, interest. Those are all revenue sources. Taxation, key concept is what is the base that you're taxing? On what is it being levied? Only the rich or only the business owners or, everybody inside this area? What's the rate? It's again into millage, things like that. What rate is applied? What's the incidence? How does it impact the taxpayers? And what's exempt and what can you deduct? What is not taxed? The ratio of tax liability to income, if it falls as income rises, that's called regressive. So if the rate you're being taxed goes down as you get more and more income, that's regressive. You're putting more of the impact on the poor. If it's equal for all incomes, that's proportionate. If it rises as income rises, that's progressive. In other words, the rich you're taxing more than you're taxing the little guy. That's progressive. Typical type of tax revenues, property tax, that's probably the largest revenue for most local governments. It, of course, is impacted by the community wealth. Sure, the property tax raised over in Palm Beach, town of Palm Beach, is much different than it is in Pahokee, because there's a very different in community wealth. It can be subject to tax revolts if you're hitting them too hard, and it impacts land development. It can result in urban sprawl or blight. Money's not enough to keep the area up, so that results in blight, or you may get people going out with a cheaper land and less taxes, so that results in sprawl. Another type of typical tax revenue is sales tax. It's a prime revenue for most states and local governments. Some states rely on that very heavily, like Florida, where we don't have an income tax. So it can be impacted by a variety of economic factors, like what's happening right now: inflation, population, tourism, technological change, demographic shift to service-based economy, or a pandemic. We'll have to add that to here. Some states and some local governments have income tax. It's the primary source for federal government and for many states and local governments. Local taxes may vary for non-residents. State and local rates tend to be less progressive than like the federal level. Okay, other type of revenues and public financing tools. These can be like user fees, popular response to tax limitation measures. People get tired of sales tax, things like that, so you end up using user fees, whether it's for the zoo or the tennis courts over there, or even now increasingly we're starting to get some calling them something else, but for transportation even. These fees may be recovered at full cost or be set lower and require tax subsidies for the services. So the revenue is subject to demand. So if people start avoiding the zoo because your tigers keep getting out, your user fees collected are going to go down. Another type is impact fees, which as planners most of us are aware of. Use a condition for approving development by requiring the developers pay fees to offset project impacts on capital infrastructure improvements needed because of development, such as schools, road, parks, fire, police, emergency systems, services, libraries, things like that. They have to meet the rational nexus, so they have to meet the Nolan-Dolan type test, the two-part test of they have to have a rational nexus or a reasonable connection to the impact that's being exacted, and they have to be roughly proportional to the level of impact that the development will cause on that issue. Public improvements may be offsite. They do not necessarily finance improvements that serve specific new development paying the fees, although sometimes that gets involved in court suits. They're paid when the development is approved, or sometimes at the building permit stage. Authorization by general statute authorizing fees with local legislation is needed, and they're typically a supplemental source of financing for those improvements because often improvements go beyond what that regional fair share of their impacts are. Another type of public finance tool is pay-as-you-go. Annual revenues as it's raised, capital revenues are financed with annual revenues. Sorry, this is how it happens. You can pay as you go type mentality where your revenue, you spend your annual revenue as it's raised. You may have some reserves financed with annual revenues, but the charges to the property may be as special assessments or impact facility or capital recovery fees or grants. Or you may be doing long-term debt capital financing through such bonding issues as general obligation bonds, which are based on your full credit as a local government. You may have revenue bonds, which are tied to certain types of development you have that may be raising that money. You can have capital lease debt or special obligation debt. You can have tax increment debt. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Or you can have a private activity debt and like industrial revenue bonds. You can also have special taxing authorities, typically perform to limit number of governmental functions in a specific geographic area. Usually have the power to incur debt and levy taxes. A big 800-pound gorilla example in Florida here, or the water management districts. They perform certain things like flood protection, environmental restoration, water supply planning, water quality planning, and they have their own ad valorem taxing authority. Okay. So going into these a little bit more, these type of capital long-term financing, general obligation bonds pledge the full faith and credit of the jurisdiction and commit property taxes by voter referendum to pay off the bonds. So these are secured by a pledge of unlimited taxing power based from the local government. The vote of people is usually required. Interest rate is lower than revenue bonds and certificates of participation or special and limited obligation bonds. They're simpler to the issuer than other debt forms, and they're typically up to 20 years, but no longer than the useful life of whatever they're building. Revenue bonds pledge specific non-ad valorem tax revenues of self-supporting enterprises. These can be things like your golf course or your zoo or whatever. Voter approval is not necessary in most states. The issuer of the bond must agree to covenants concerning the rate setting and operation of the enterprise. And the net earnings to maximum annual debt service is set to maximum annual debt service. The interest rates are higher than general obligation bonds, and they can be up to 30 years, but no longer than the useful life or whatever the capital improvements being built. Tax increment financing, which always comes up on the exam, is issued to provide public facilities needed to support new private development, typically in redevelopment projects, often under a CRA, or Community Redevelopment Authority. These are secured by increased tax revenues produced by the new private development. This tax revenue and the new development are removed from the general tax base and are set aside to secure and pay the tax increment as long as it's outstanding. Let me see. In other words, this is Delray Beach, the CRA. This was going along here. What they did is they said, okay, we're going to assume that this rate is going to continue about this rate. So we, the local government, the water management district, and the school, everything, we'll take this couple percent increase Maybe it's a 5% increase. We'll take this 5% increase per year throughout this time frame through 2011 as what we'll get that increase. So this will be our tax base. If there's any increase in the tax base because you build all these improvements and the private development really succeeds, you'll get all that difference, that tax increment difference, to put back and pay off the bonds you did for all the public infrastructure you put in here and to build any new projects. So that's tax increment financing. It's based on the assumption that you'll either have a flat or slightly increasing tax rate that goes back to the local government and other people that have ad valorem taxing authority, with the difference between that flat or slightly increasing value and what the taxes are that are produced because of the improvements go back in to feed off the bonds. So it's secured by increased tax revenue produced by the new private development. This tax revenue and the new development are removed from the general tax base, so that big area is not going back into the local government, the schools, the water management district. They're legally set aside to secure and pay the debt for as long as it's outstanding. So a tax increment financing program must be established under the guideline of state authorizing legislation. Typically works as following. A TIF district is established around a blighted area. This was Delray Beach, CRA. The bonds are issued to redevelop the area. So they were going to put in, I don't know, roads and buy property and do all sorts of other things here. After the area is redeveloped, the additional property tax earned by the reassessed district, the tax increment, are used to retire the bonds. Thus, those additional revenues cannot be used by the involved municipalities, school districts, special taxes until the bonds are retired. In the case like here at Delray Beach, they had a plan and the bonding went out to this year to pay it off. And then at this point, in Delray Beach's point, they allowed the CRA to go on for 5 years as long as it came back and got approved every 5 years to do that, or they cut it off. But once it's cut off, the tax that extra, if this was the base rate, that difference then goes right back to the local government, and the local government gets all that money along with the school board and whoever else gets the ad valorem taxing. So typically, tax increment financing has a drop dead date. It's typically either for when the bonds get paid off or when some agreement that the local government has with the CRA ends. Like in Delray Beach, there's a 5-year by 5-year approval process that they can go on. And if they don't renew it, then boom, it bumps right up and the local government gets all the money, the additional tax. So here, the 1985 tax roll assessment was approximately $250. The tax roll value for the district was worth $1.2 billion. So if this was a flat rate that they set, but it wasn't, it was a percentage, it's like percentage up. But if it was tax rate, that would stay at $250 million. And that difference between $250 million to whatever, $1.2 billion here is what would go back to keep paying off the bond or go back and roll into the CRA. Everybody clear on tax increment financing? Okay. Some other terms you need to know here. Special assessment district. Impose a levy on property, individual lots, all property in a designated neighborhood or district to pay for improvements. Special assessments are charged to property for public improvements that benefit that property. They're improvements that are on site or nearby. They're generally not paid until the project is done and improvement cost is known. And they're authorized by general statute for water, sewer, streets, beach erosion, storm areas. So if you may take an area and say, I don't know, just call it the Jones area. So the Jones area of your local government. You say, well, we need to improve this area. So you do a special assessment that's going to go back only to improve it. So the special assessment is only going to be placed on that area, but the improvements go back into that area. Okay. So it's for a particular area, designated neighborhood or district to pay for improvements to that neighborhood or district. All right. Business improvement district, typically the business leaders say, we need to improve our area. So we're willing to get together and allow additional taxes to be put on us to fund activities that will benefit us. So property owners pay an additional tax to fund activities that benefit their district, such as increased security, public events, urban design improvements, wayfinding, whatever they are. That's a BID, BID, or a business improvement district. They're basically putting additional taxes on themselves. And of course, we talked about the Community Redevelopment Agency with the TIF, but it's a special taxing area in Florida created under Florida's Chapter 163, which is also our growth management law. That's based on finding a slum and blight. Sorry. There's data analysis of physical and economic conditions that has to be done, the number of vacant buildings and land, income levels, et cetera, et cetera. CRA must adopt a redevelopment plan, establish a trust fund for deposit of the tax increment finance revenues. The CRA gets both the city and county tax dollars above whatever baseline has been set. And also in Florida, be also the water management districts ad valorem taxing above that level, and also schools. Funds can be used for redevelopment purposes or to leverage bonds. And the redevelopment plan includes projects and programs that the CRA will expend funds on and must be consistent with the local government plan. So examples of some of the types of activities the CRAs do are infrastructure improvements, grants and loans to businesses to get started or to improve the area, trying to put land together to try to do larger projects, marketing promotions, or doing cultural or sports designation type marketing, things like that. Another type of special tax authority is downtown development authorities, DDAs. These are special taxing districts that use funds for improvements. They're established by a vote of the downtown development authority residents, the business owners, things like that. Activities can include things like business development, attraction, improving physical environment, residential quality of life, leveraging private investments, marketing, public relationships. The board can be a municipal governing body or a different other stakeholder group. Another one is community development corporations. They're a nonprofit established for very specific purposes, typically something like a business incubator or to put in affordable housing. And of course, other non-governmental organization type groups that they spend money in certain areas, or things like merchant associations or chamber of commerce. Two types of programs you need to know and that come up on the exam. Knowing the difference between an enterprise zone and an empowerment zone. Let me see if I've got another slide on this too. Yeah. And enterprise zone, economic depressed area that has been targeted for revitalization by a state or a city through tax abatement and other incentives given to companies that locate or expand their operation within the zone. Those tax abatements and those incentives are things like abatement of state taxes or city taxes. So it's enterprise zone is primarily a state-run program. Empowerment zones are something very similar. They deal with economic distressed rural and or urban area designated by U.S. Department of Agriculture or Housing and Urban Development. So federal, designated by federal agencies. Businesses in those zones can avail themselves of federal grants and federal tax incentives. And businesses get credits for hiring people within the zone that's designated. Okay, so.
Henry,
yes.
The 2017 designated opportunity zones, would those be closer to enterprise than the empowerment?
I don't know.
Categories?
I don't know right offhand.
It looks like it's closer to enterprise zone from what I know about it.
I don't know if it's more, where are the benefits? Is that a state of Florida program?
No, it's federal. It was done under Trump. 2017.
Okay.
Like Hollywood, the city has 2 opportunity zones. It's
Yeah,
all over the country. There's like 400 in the country.
I don't know that program. All right.
Okay.
Um, and
Henry,
so far, it hadn't come up on the exam that I'm aware of. But go ahead.
Henry,
Yeah.
DeSantis got rid of the state opportunity zone program. He didn't want to participate in it.
The enterprise or the opportunity pro?
The opportunity zones.
Oh, okay. And as far as I know, that program has not come up on the exam yet. Whereas enterprise zone and empowerment zones have. Now, in Florida, unless it's changed, the enterprise zone program has expired. I think either there was a time set or they got rid of the legislation that authorized it. But it's still, both of the programs started off as federal legislation, but one of them was a state-run program to give state incentives and tax breaks. The other was a federal program. There are some other slight differences between them. I may give you some stuff that gets into that a little bit, but the one of those being that empowerment zones can happen in rural areas, and enterprise zones basically happen more in urban areas only. And empowerment zones could get into housing issues a little bit. But anyway, those are just know the difference between enterprise and zone and empowerment zones. There have been occasionally a question on that. This program is created under the Clinton administration to help distressed areas be more competitive, and it's actually, the answer is the enterprise zone. It was a federal legislation, but it was run basically by state and locals. To encourage economic investment, incentives such as reduced property or sales tax are utilized in enterprise zones. And this was another. Another one is the independent unit of local government that is usually created by referendum and organized to perform specific governmental functions, and that is a special district. I will tell you, though, that in Florida, they're not typically done by referendum. They're done by state legislation, but apparently in a lot of other states, special districts can be done by referendum. And the key thing is they are to perform specific governmental functions such as flood protection or environmental protection. We have some, or certain types of medical, special districts, things like that. And often they have ad valorem taxes. So special districts typically perform a limited number of governmental functions in a specific geographic area and usually have the power to curb debt and levy taxes. An example is the Water Management District or the Lake Worth Drainage District. Okay, is another type of special district. We've got about 40 some, I think, in Palm Beach County alone. Everything from environmental to medical to drainage to water management district. All right. Capital Improvements Program. Capital Improvements Program typically covers a multi-year period, typically 5 to 6 year plan. It organizes, summarizes major capital projects and plans for the full forecast period. That's why it's a capital improvements program. Now, what are capital improvements? Things like roads are going to last a long period of time, right? They're not things like maintenance or replacement. They're not. So they're the library, but not the books in the library. They may be the fire building, the fire truck, but not the hoses for the firefighting equipment. Okay, anyway, the CIP forecasts the larger budgetary impact of capital expenditures, both project-related costs, estimated operating impacts, and available required revenues. The budgets for the upcoming year as well, that is called a capital budget. The budget is for 1 year typically, can be sometimes 2 years. Recurs and updated annually or biannually, although biannually means twice a year. Right? It's not my slides. Biannual is twice a year, right? occurring twice a year. Okay. So updated once a year or twice a year. Introduce projects in the later year to the program. The budgeting future expenditures may be in the program, maybe standard driven or reflect patronage usage, or be revenue driven. May reflect long-term financing, or may reflect pay-as-you-go strategy. May use special assessments, taxes, or fees not available for the operating budget. Now, what are capital projects? Any acquisition of land for a public purpose. So purchase land for a new park, right away for a road, new facility, major addition facilities, so new road, right away, new fire station, reoccurring rehabilitation, major repair, major renovation of City Hall, must be major rehabilitation, long-lived and expensive, purchase of major equipment, so purchase of a new fire engine, new transit buses, again, must be major, long-lived and expensive. Any planning, feasibility, engineering related to those improvements, so expenses related to the studies of the roadway extension is capital projects. Things that aren't are those things that are more temporary, short-lived, like books, the fire hoses, things like that. Pothole repair is typically not considered capital. The stakes are high for capital budgeting. Infrastructure and other capital investments are very expensive, very long-term. Choices being made about spending on these items must be made carefully. They affect other things. The decisions extend for years. Given decisions with long-term implications, it makes sense to have a separate budget items that takes a longer term view of these investments. The spending varies tremendously by year, so revenues can vary by year, especially those with intergovernmental transfers. So capital budget is required to take account of funding that fluctuates year by year. So you may look out 5 or 6 years, and your 1-year budget is moving in there, and you may be redoing your estimates for what you're going to do in years 2, 3, 4, 5 as you go on. Okay, so next year, what you said in 2 years, you might put this much money in it. You say, well, maybe we got to put that out another year, or maybe we got to spend twice as much money on it because other costs have gone up, something like that. So your CIP is always changing each year, typically to some degree, because it's reflecting what's happening in terms of your revenue, in terms of problems, or in terms of opportunities, things like that. Purpose of capital budgeting, your project needs vary tremendously year by year. Just as your revenues vary, so do your expenditures. Your infrastructure and other capital needs are lumpy. They're not easily captured in an operating budget. Implementations can take a long time. Most capital projects take years of planning to construct, a period of ill timing suited to an operating budget. We actually did our capital, our equivalent for our agency capital planning budget, capital planning plan out 20 years, because some of our projects may take up to, we have to consider on a 100-year time frame at the Water Management District for some of the infrastructure involved with water planning. Debt financing is used. Debt financing requires excellent planning, oversight to work efficiently. In addition, potential lenders want to see a rational budgeting process before they will purchase bonds. That's another purpose of capital budgeting, capital improvements planning.
Henry, can I ask
yes.
a question on the debt financing, please?
Yeah.
Is that collateralized against the assets themselves typically, so that if a project fails, they'll have something to collect on?
Depends on what type of debt financing they're doing. We covered a bunch of them, like general obligation bonds, things like that, where that's based on the full faith and credit of the municipality or the county to do taxation and raise taxation if they need. Other types of things for other types of places, it may be based on that. I'm not
Maybe for a pipeline or a fire engine, if for some reason they go under, perhaps they collect on the asset.
They
I'm not
collect
sure.
on it's on a source of revenue. They're not going to repossess a fire truck that's needed by a community. And, they're not going to try to take back assets associated with water treatment plants. It's almost 99% of the time, it's some sort of revenue source that you're pledging that you'll just give them.
That's
Okay.
why your general obligation bonds or your revenue bonds or things like that, you're based on user fees or things. Like I said, it depends on where it is.
I did encounter this working in manufacturing for 2 years. So that's
Well,
why I asked.
remember, I've been a state planner and a regional planner, never a local planner. So I haven't had to deal with budget from a local government point of view before. I've only dealt with it from a state agency point of view, and even the regional agency I worked for was an agency of the state. The water management districts in Florida are creations, are an agency of the state. So we had our own ad valorem taxing authority, plus grants, plus other things, plus state funds from the legislature, things like that. All right, analysis and program evaluation. Only thing I mentioned here is economic base multiplier, and that's basically if you're going to put in something like scripts, say here in Palm Beach County, you're going to assume that for maybe each employment, each employee that they're going to have, that maybe you'll generate 3 other jobs. That's the economic base multiplier in essence. So if you put in 500 jobs, then you say that you may be going to generate an additional 1,500 other employees to help service that particular industry that you put in. So that's the economic base multiplier.
It's called dominoes effect.
Yeah, it's often done that way. It can be done monetarily, but typically it's done by number of employees. Just know what a multiplier effect is. That may come up. Fiscal impact analysis. I think we covered this previously a little bit, but do know the difference between cost benefit, cost revenue, cost effectiveness, and how to do things like figuring out fiscal impact of if you put in a project. This is something we did a lot at DCA when I was there for DRIs. We would calculate out what the impact is going to be on things like new road construction, things like that, so we could figure out what type of impacts they're going to have. So what type of impacts should they be addressing as part of their approval process? And this is where you get into per capita or multiplier methods, trying to figure out, okay, so for each house you put in, how many school children is that going to generate? How is that going to relate to whether or not we need new schoolrooms and new teachers and things like that? All right, a good place to look at all the difference on these is look in the CPC guide. They have a discussion of that, but we covered it once before, so I'm not going to try to do it again. What is economic development? We covered this to some degree before, but we'll just touch on it. It's a set of policies and activities that seek to improve the economic well-being, quality of life carried out by states, regions, cities, localities through both the public sector and private-public partnerships, as well as entities such as chamber of commerce, community organizations, etc. It includes the programming activities that add value to the community, such as increasing the tax base, increasing the physical value through infrastructure improvements, or the societal value through the creation and retention of jobs, or the elimination of blighted conditions. There's 3 core activities: business recruitment and attraction, often targeting specific areas; business retention and expansion, particularly for your small businesses. You're not trying to put them out of there to try to get somebody else big in. And then third one is enterprise and small business development, strengthening the market. Those 3 of your core. So you're trying to entice businesses to locate or relocate to an area. So you may conduct a business location profile, identify which types of industries are expanding, which types they're looking for, type of labor force, educational needs, land needs, complementary industries in the area, housing, things like that. So what's your target industries? Who's looking and what are they looking for? This was a big deal, like I said, locally here for Scripps, trying to get the biotech industry in. So trying to figure out what do they want for education all around the area? What were they looking for? You know, what are they looking for? Who's looking and what are they looking for? Identifying also and promoting and marketing what your community has to offer, relationships to those needs. So do you have a highly educated workforce? If so, in what areas? Do you have suitable sites available? Unfortunately, with Scripps, they said, here's a site that you're real good for. The problem is they hadn't done all the due diligence on the wetlands on the site. So they ran into a challenge permit issue. Corps issued a permit, but only for a piece of the project. We covered this when we did NEPA, talked about the Mecca site, but they hadn't looked at the whole project, and the whole project was problematic. They were going to have to do an EIS. Scripps says we can't wait that long. So luckily they had another site further to the east that they could go right into. So suitable sites, real important issue. What's available housing, the quality of life. They're up there near where they've got Jupiter and Avoca and all those type of quality of life type of aspects that a lot of people like. How do you entice businesses to locate or relocate to an area? Well, you can offer them incentives such as reduced taxes, tax rebates. This is something they did with Scripps, almost $1 billion subsidy one way or another. You can offer them free or below market land or loans, access to technology, training, and other resources, or grants on factors such as number of jobs created or fee reductions, expedited permitting. The other thing you can help them with is offer your staff maybe to help them locate space, make connections, collaborate, and start forming those symbiotic relationships they need, and maybe just pure moral support. You want to also try to prevent companies from leaving by identifying problems and helping to resolve them. So you want to assist them, the currently existing companies, in creating new markets, improving technology, training resources, facilitating the move to new locations within inside your same jurisdiction, helping them to obtain the local government permit approvals, maybe providing them land for expansion if they're landlocked businesses, and maybe reduce their costs and impacts. So some other types of incentives, you may give them industrial revenue bonds. That's a loan to a company to build or buy facility, land, or equipment. The local government issues the bond. The investors purchase the bonds. The funds are used to make the loan. The interest on the bond repayments are generally tax-free to the investor. That's the advantage to the investor. The company repays the bond. It typically retains ownership of the land during the repayment period. But the company pays minimal taxes. At the end of the repayment, ownership then transfers to the company. And revolving loan fund is typically like seed money that's established. Loans can be made and repaid. Funds are reloaned to the next applicant. And again, we've got the enterprise zones and empowerment zones. The economic distressed area target for improvement. Businesses can locate, create jobs, receive tax exemptions and tax credits from state or local governments. These would be sales tax, utility taxes, property taxes, and empowerment zones. These are economic distressed rural and urban areas designated by USDA and HUD. The businesses in the zone can avail themselves of federal grants and federal tax incentives, and the businesses get credits for hiring people within the zone. Business incubator programs. You support business startups by providing services such as inexpensive free office space, offering them technical assistance with their business plan, offering them administrative support, maybe marketing assistance, or maybe providing them with a way to get access to capital, or provide them environments that foster collaboration. There's also the Small Business Administration, which is an agency of the federal government that assists and protects interests of small businesses. They have loan programs such as guaranteed loans made by private lenders. Their funds can be used for startup, working capital, acquisition of land and buildings and machinery and equipment. You can also have microloans. It hasn't come up on the exam for a while, but it did about 5-6 years ago. These are small, short-term loans for small, usually startup businesses. The funds are used for purchase of inventory and supplies, for fixtures, but not for land acquisition or conservation. And then you have the venture capitalists, the angel investors, venture capital funds. These are funds that are made available to invest in potentially high profitable business ventures at considerable risk to the investor. In exchange for investments in a company, the venture capitalist receives an equity stake in the company, such as preferred stocks and options that give the investor part ownership in the company. Venture capital is considered high risk capital because the investments aren't guaranteed. All other claims must be paid before equity investments are repaid. The Securities and Exchange Commission reports that for every 10 businesses founded through venture capital, 7 or 8 will fail or fail to turn a satisfactory profit. But rewards can be great. This is how Amazon, Cisco, Compaq, eBay, Federal Express, Starbucks, and Staples all received venture capital investments that helped them along their way. And Palm Beach County has a lot of very high-end people that live here. So we have a lot of venture capital possibilities. That was one thing that I think intrigued Scripps when they came here, is that we did have a large amount of billionaires and other money that could be possibly done through venture capitalists. All right, some additional terms to know. Clawback is a provision in a contract that limits or reverses a payment or distribution for a specified reason, such as a failure to meet required hired employee quotas in an economic development grant. So clawback is where local government typically gives out money, but you made a guarantee that there are going to be so many jobs, and you didn't do that, or you didn't build what you were going to say. You said you'd build, so they claw back that money. They take it back. Fixed costs is something else that's come up on the exam. These are business costs such as rent or mortgage, insurance, or other overhead costs that don't change month to month, regardless of the business sales or production volume. Another one is performance bond. A bond that's issued to one party of a contract is a guarantee against the failure of the other party to meet obligations in the contract, such as failure to complete highway improvements by a specified date. So that's a performance bond. And two other terms that were commented on that come up that I decided to expand a little bit more because I think they want a little more detail. Direct costs and indirect costs, primarily in relationship to a private consulting firm or something similar. Direct costs are costs that are traceable to the production of a specific project or service, such as the staff time and other costs by a private consulting firm to draft, maybe to do something like develop the draft of a municipal comprehensive plan. They are the starting point for any calculation of consulting costs. For a planning consultant, these typically include the following items: salaries of professional staff, salaries of office staff, technician, other support personnel, sick leave, vacation, holiday pay for the staff that are involved with the project, group insurance, subcontractors, project-related travel, project-related materials. Indirect costs, the costs of running the business that are not directly attributable to a specific project, but are typically either fixed or a percentage of them is included in the indirect costs. And these are only a few examples. Office and other supplies, computer hardware, software, network access costs, electronic communication costs, equipment purchase and rental costs, occupancy costs for an office, including lease costs or building and utilities, legal services, accounting services, professional dues, training, conferences, insurance, like for unemployment, workers' comp, fire, theft, and flood. Those are just some examples. There's a longer list in one of the publications by APA, but that gives you an idea, enough, I think, to deal with what comes up in exam. And with that, I'm not Francine, but if you have any questions before we go into some practice questions, let me know. I'll do my best, but realize I'm not a local government planner. I've not dealt with local government budgeting financing. I have dealt with regional and state agency budget and finance. No questions? Okay. We'll go over to practice questions. And then we may end early tonight. See. Okay. Assume everybody can see that. And I assume everybody is still, let me just double check, see if everybody's still able to be. Oh, Ebony, I'm trying to, okay, you should be okay now, Ebony. Heather, I've unmuted you. I'm trying to, yep, okay. Inez, I'm trying to, okay, you should be okay now, Inez. Whoop, it keeps going back. Okay, now try to self-mute yourself. I can hear you now, Inez. Okay. And Jim, I've tried to, okay, you should be okay now, Jim. And Jacqueline, I've unmuted you, so if you could self-mute yourself.
Okay. I cannot find the mute. I'm sorry. Oh,
Okay, then just be very quiet. All right. Jim, I'm trying you again. Okay.
We're good, thanks.
Okay. It just, some of you, it goes back and it reverts for some reason that I don't know. Katie, that's your situation. Okay. I keep clicking to unmute. Okay, you should be okay now. Nicole, I've unmuted you. Osni, I've unmuted you. So, okay. Ram, I've unmuted you. So if you'd self-mute yourself, Ram. Thanks. And Stefan, I've unmuted you. So if you'd self-mute yourself. Okay. Feel free to, though, unmute yourself and answer the questions.
Henry, I have a question.
Yes.
Are CRAs available only in Florida?
Or what?
CRAs, so the
No,
community.
CRAs are across the country. Community redevelopment.
Okay.
But it depends upon your state legislation that you have. But a community redevelopment agency is typically a redevelopment agency that is codified under state legislation, and they can do certain things. Most states, in reaction to the Kelo decision, took away their ability to use a lot of eminent domain. It varies across the country. In Florida, for instance, our CRAs could use eminent domain to condemn property, to assemble it and do redevelopment. But the state legislature took away that authority after a certain date. If you had a plan in place before a certain date, you could use it. If you didn't, like Riviera Beach here locally, they didn't get their plan adopted in time, so they can only assemble land, purchase land from willing sellers. They can no longer use eminent domain. But anyway, most states have it, if not all, have some form of it. Wikipedia's probably got a chart or something that shows you which states have it or which don't, whatever. All right, so techniques in a small suburban town of 35,000.
D for David.
D for David.
C for cat.
So I heard cat, David. The answer is going to actually be capital improvements element.
Wow.
Yeah. The capital improvements element, because it's the one that sets out what infrastructure is going to be needed for what time frame. Okay. That's going to drive the impact fee regulation. So the capital improvements program that you have showing what infrastructure you're going to need over the next 5 years or longer, that drives what you can then set up for what impact fee program you have, particularly by district. Does that make sense? This is an APA question, not me. So capital improvements program is often required to set the foundation for sustainable impact fee regulation. because it's the one that goes out and says, we're going to need, it looks like we're projecting because of development occurring in this area, we're going to need this many teachers in this for this school. We're going to need a new school year. We're going to need new road here. We're going to, whatever. Okay. Of the following growth management techniques, which would mostly be like to control growth to coincide with the capital improvements plan?
D for Delta.
No,
A for
B.
apple.
not B, not D.
A for apple.
A for apple. It's going to be building permit cap. Think Petaluma case. Building permit caps are an effective growth management tool that, when coupled with a capital improvements plan, time the issuance of building permits to coincide with the community's ability to support development and its demand. This comes right out of associated with the California Petaluma case, court case, with building permits set up for capping how many building permits could be issued. In Florida, we have something similar in the Florida Keys. They have a rate of growth ordinance called ROGO, and that's tied to all sorts of improvements. But the one that actually triggers it the most restrictively is actually the evacuation time out of the Keys. So although it's tied to growth management, it's tied to building permit caps, but in the Florida Keys, it's not the road improvements, it's not the school, it's the actual evacuation time that limits how many building permit caps they can issue by zone in the Keys. The others are all analysis that are part of ROGO, but they aren't the ones that are the one that most restricts it. All right. Which of the following land transfer technique does not afford the seller any tax reduction? We didn't talk about this one, but just to give it to you.
A.
No, A definitely does afford typically tax reduction.
B.
C.
C for Charlie.
It's going to be fair market value sale. Do you get any tax reductions when you buy land or sell land for fair market value?
That was my first thought, but I thought you would be able to get taxes off on that. But okay, yeah,
Yep,
makes sense.
the others do. Okay, a sale at fair market value is a sale property at the price a knowledgeable player would pay for the land. If the land is, and these are APA questions. This so far are APA questions. If the land is sold at full value and is appreciated value since the purchase, the seller will be liable for the tax income on the capital gain. There are no charitable deductions or other tax breaks associated with a sale at full value. Bargain sale is part donation, part sale. It may entitle a seller to an income tax deduction for charitable contribution and to a reduction in capital gains. So a bargain sale is where you're typically selling to a nonprofit or to a governmental agency, and you're selling it at less than fair market value. So therefore, it's a bargain sale. If the value of the land is $1 million, you're selling it for $200,000. Okay, so that you're selling to the nonprofit like Nature Conservancy, or you're selling it to Department of Environmental Protection because you want to make sure that the land gets protected. So it's a bargain sale. It's part donation, part sale. You get to claim the difference between the sale price and the full market value. So you get to take, according to whether you pay federal taxes or state taxes or whatever, you get, in that case that I just gave you, $800,000 of that would be the bargain sale portion. And that is going to give you a tax break according to which one associated with that $800,000 that you gave as a donation to the nonprofit or to the state. Installment payment sale allows a public agency or an organization to purchase property over a period of years. The seller benefits financially by spreading the income and the taxable gains over several years. So again, that $1 million property, but this time you're going to sell it to them and they will pay you $200,000 per year over 5 years. So you get to then spread your income out over 5 years and not have to take the property gains and all like that at one time. And then the donation or outright gift affords the donor tax benefits in the form of federal income tax deductions, potential estate tax benefits, and relief from property taxes. Okay? Do I understand that one, everybody? Everybody understands why B is the answer?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'm going to skip 124. I'm going to go to 149.
We did this already.
Which one?
Cat.
See it, yes. See it. It's going to be an impact fee program. I guess that's what you said, and I just sometimes I'm a little hard of hearing. Impact fee program is most likely to accomplish this goal, although a broad inclusionary housing program could recommend methods of passing on development costs to new residents. But this sets up to be an impact fee. Goal of passing on development costs to new residents. How much is, we're going to need new road, we're going to need new school. How are you going to pay the impact fee program? What's the term that refers to financing improvements to a specific area?
Special assessment.
No.
Apple.
It's the
D.
second part. It's the second part that's the clue. That are secured bonds
Designated.
that are secured by increases in property taxes.
Dog.
Just
Tax increment.
dog. Okay. It's the second part. I tricked you a little bit because I
That's
intentionally
A,
didn't read that last one.
special assessment.
No, not with bonds that are secured by increases in property taxes. That is tax increment financing. If it said, what is the term that refers to improvements to a specific area that are paid for by the residents within that area, that would be a special assessment. But with bonds that are secured by increases in the resulting increase in property tax, that's tax increment financing. Tax increment financing uses bonds secured by the increment in property tax that results from increased property values due to specific improvements. Key element of the city's comprehensive plan established various techniques.
B for boy.
Yeah, this is the general fund. General fund represents a collection of taxes from multiple sources, usually mixed or commingled for the purpose of providing general government services. By definition, general funds cannot be earmarked for specific municipal projects and are available for funding a variety of municipal activities. As a result, fees collected from various revenue sources are deposited as specific items, thus available for funding that particular when you're doing a revenue source. What is the term? Some of these we didn't cover explicitly, but
C for Charlie.
Like Florida, it'd be
that's
C.
it's balanced budget. No county shall incur any indebtedness exceeding any year the income and revenue provided for such year. That means balanced budget. Their money spent must equal the money that they got in. So the buffer requirement is the debt limitation law, requiring the county not incur indebtedness. And I think this is going to be the last question. I'm going to have to stop. My dogs are scratching on the door. They need to go out. So I'm going to have to stop this a little early. And Susan's not here still. She's down with her brother. So 8.
C for Charlie.
C for Charlie. Deal with land purchases. Deal with, might address concurrency stuff, but it would not be the same timeframes as the budget, and it would not deal with pothole repairs. So C for Charlie. It's usually typically a 5 to 6 year roadmap for planning, funding public facilities and infrastructure. Incorporates both the construction of new facilities and rehabilitation existing capital facilities. Essential link between growth, the timing, phasing, or concurrency of capital investments. Local government budget typically addresses 1 or 2 years, addresses operational funding. So that does operational like pothole repairs, new fire hoses, and those are not considered capital. So with that, I'm going to end us a little early tonight. Take care of my dogs. So, but you'll get the full set of questions here.
Okay. Henry, may I have you ask a question of you right quick?
Yes.
Forgive me, I had called you earlier today in regards to trying to reschedule my testing. I was supposed to happen next week. When I went to the Prometric to try to reschedule, it had me canceled, and I'm not seeing any way to reschedule my
I think look first. Look at the all the.
Go ahead, please.
Let me just get there real quick. APA.
Ditto on his comment. The site has errors today. Was not working the last few days, last week.
Well, there's 2 things to do. One, make sure. Let me see if this has got the May thing. Okay, so they talked to you about May, what to do here, and they talked to you how.
Yeah, I went there and
What you should be doing is they should cancel you for May and then reset you up for how to do. But if you run into a problem, the person to contact is going to be who they want you to deal with is the exam. Let me find the number here.
Yep, I've called and left messages and no one has responded.
Okay, they should be responding, but I do find sometimes they answer better on emails. Have you sent them? You sent them an email also?
No, I haven't.
Okay, do you have the email address, or do I need to try to find it for you?
I saw an email address on the APA site.
Okay.
But
let me just open up the. I know I can find it. I should be able to find it right here.
Are you referring to AICPexam@planning.org?
Right, but there's also there's a telephone for that, and then that's the email address. But if you go into the brochure here, it should tell you here.
Mm-hmm.
That's the phone number, and then that's the AICP exam at planning.org. That's the other. If they don't answer you within another about day and a half, even if it's a weekend, contact me and I'll try to give you. The only thing I can give you is 1 or 2 of the planners who may be doing this, but I know that they lost one of their planners, so I know they're working a little shorthanded. But anyway, that's the other email address you should go to.
Okay. Prometric's been down for like a week or 2. They're not answering the phone.
That's why I'm saying go into APA to find out what's going on. Prometric's got its own contact, but try to go through APA right now since you're having problems with the Prometric. That's the best I can have you. I don't deal with that part of it directly, so all I can do is refer you to the APA staff or try to give you the Prometric contacts.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I can't help you more. Okay, anybody else? I'm going to.
Henry, if possible, can we finish the budget questions on Saturday?
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, we can try to do that. Okay. All right. I'm going to end. Sorry, guys.
Be well.
Thank you.